Like, so it's almost like politics have become our new God. Like, it is the most important thing to people. And then religion is like a layer on top of that. And it's not the most foundational thing anymore, which
Yeah,
is weird.
I actually agree with that. And you want to know what I'm seeing increase? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Life After Deconstruction podcast. My name is Anthony Miller, and today I'm grateful to be able to share with you part one of what I'll release in two parts of a conversation that I had with my friend Marti Neilsen of the Where Will You Go podcast. In this episode, we talk about politics and philosophy and mixed faith relationships and difficult conversations post deconstruction. I hope you enjoy the episode.
I was just thinking about like, there seems to be, I hear this in a conservative space a lot. Like Ben Shapiro will talk about it a lot, just how the sense that our social fabric is fraying. Do you get that same sense at all? Like, is there, and I'm not making a judgment claim on like it's anybody's fault. Like, I honestly think it's just happening. What's happening is happening. But as we observe it, like, would it be fair to say that like having a common belief, whether that's a Christian, Judeo-Christian value structure system, like by losing that, which I feel like it is like, I think atheism is like the number one growing belief group.
Yeah.
So as we're losing that value, like is that what's causing some of this social fabric to be tearing? If it is tearing, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree that it's disintegrating. And I agree that there's more us versus them, and there's less seeking out shared values. And so when September 11th happened, certainly there were some people that responded with, this is just blowback from the stuff that we've been doing in the rest of the world, kind of thing. But I think there were the majority of the country, regardless of their political or religious ideology, um, they felt like Americans, and they felt like a part, the people who were killed were a part of them in some way.
Hmm.
And if that happened today, 22 years later, I don't know. I don't know if that same thing would happen. I don't know if people would go, oh, that's just the liberal New Yorkers, or I don't know.
I think we
And
have evidence that it wouldn't happen because I think there was an opportunity for that kind of unity during COVID and it didn't happen.
yeah, I've read and heard that, and to a certain extent, I agree with that because, um, like in our community, we were late to have COVID initially come in, but like it hit one assisted living facility, and in 45 days, it killed 2/3 of the people in the assisted living facility.
Hmm.
And you would think that that would have impacted the community differently than it did, but it was so politicized that I mean, there were people that didn't believe that it was COVID that killed those people. There was the whole mask thing.
Hmm.
There was It just became so politicized that I think of any other circumstance where in a short period of time, dozens and dozens of people died in our community. If it was something other than COVID, maybe it wouldn't have been that politicized and our community would have done something about it.
Yeah.
You
Or
know,
maybe COVID was too slow moving for people to have the time to have their political opinions first or something where September 11 was suddenly, I don't know. Maybe it's not apples to apples, but I don't
yeah.
know. I don't know. Even when Trump was talking about the vaccine, you had some people on the left side saying, "I'm not taking that. That's coming out way too fast." And then as soon as the presidency flipped, then it was the other side that was saying they weren't going to take it. So,
Yeah, it was definitely politicized, and
yeah.
the perpetuation of conspiracies. Um, the social fabric is tearing, and I don't. And the political theater is changing, and I don't,
I spe
the tipping point I think is way gone, and I don't see a change.
I speculate that as religion, even if people claim to believe, they're so compartmentalized with living in their daily life. You know, they're using cell phones, they're using the stuff that the scientific method has produced.
Yeah,
And the scientific method is over here saying that there's not supernatural stuff either.
right.
So I feel like whether people claim, you know, whether they're whatever self is saying, hey, yeah, I'm participating. I really do literally believe all this stuff that this church believes. Um, I think it's not believable. And it's almost like politics are becoming the new like foundational belief that people have. Like I think it's easier, and there's evidence of this in the ex-Mormon space. It's easier for John Dehlin to get along with Patrick Mason than it is for John Dehlin to get along with someone like me. Like
Mm.
where I am on the same page with John Dehlin as far as religion goes, but we differ politically. And I'm not saying, um, like, I'm trying to think of anybody conservative that he's had on his show. Can't think of anyone. And it's not to say that hasn't happened, but
Yeah, I'm sure there are some. He did a couple episodes when Trump won, I think,
hmm,
or maybe it was in the midterm elections. He did a couple episodes, one that had pro-Trump people on and one that had.
right. But same thing. It's like it's almost easier for me to get along with someone like Jacob Hansen than I'm trying to think of someone on. It's easier for me to get along with Jake Hansen than it is for me to get along with John Dehlin too. Like,
Because of
like,
political philosophies.
right. Like, so it's almost like politics have become our new God. Like, it is the most important thing to people. And then religion is like a layer on top of that. And it's not the most foundational thing anymore, which
Yeah,
is weird.
I actually agree with that. And you want to know what I'm seeing increase, and it'll be interesting, very interesting to me to see where this goes. Is I'm seeing an increasing number of people go through a faith crisis because they believe the brethren aren't conservative enough.
Or vice
So
versa, right?
they lost their faith over vaccines, or they lost their faith over the church getting involved with the NAACP, or they lost belief over their brethren recognizing
Have
Biden and Harris as
have you met
winning the
people like
elections.
have you met anybody like that? I haven't met anyone in real life that has that view. Um,
Um,
so I'm just curious like how like prevalent you think that is. I don't doubt that it's happened, but
um,
just trying to get a gauge on that.
yeah, so one of my friends is Chris Kimball. He's been on the board of Dialogue. He recently wrote a book called Living on the Inside of the Edge. It's pretty good. If you like David Osler's book, I think you might like Chris Kimball's book. But what he's telling me is he's going and giving presentations about living on the inside of the edge of the church after having lost literalist belief about his book. And he's been giving feedback in a group that I'm in, sharing that an increasing number of the people that come up and speak to him after are people who their shift was political stuff because they were more conservative. The members were more conservative than the brethren. And so they lost literal belief because they were more conservative politically than they perceived the brethren were.
Hmm.
And so it is mostly secondhand. I'm sure I've had conversations with a few people who lean that direction.
I just like my
But
my family is like as conservative as can be, and none of them are going anywhere as far as the church goes. So that's why I'm like, if I feel like I would see it in my life if it was super prevalent, I guess. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I don't think it's super prevalent. I think that it's a dynamic that's increasing.
Hmm.
Like there was one, it might have been Oaks gave a talk alluding to, I don't know if he gave a talk alluding to climate change or it was adjacent to climate change.
Taking
And
care of the environment or something.
yeah, that upset a lot of people.
Hmm.
Because there's so many people that their perception of climate change is that it's, I mean, it certainly is politicized, but they are totally convinced that it's a hoax too.
Hmm.
And so I think if you had President Nelson talk about donating tithing dollars to something that would produce more clean energy or something like that, I think there would be some members that they would feel like that's gone too far because their political view of climate change, for example, is a stronger belief than their religious belief.
Hmm.
You
Which
know,
isn't great. Like I think that it kind of goes to show you that whatever benefit religion has, it should be like a wisdom mechanism. And if your politics are overtaking your life, then that wisdom mechanism that the religion is supposed to be providing is not doing its job. I think maybe I don't know.
I agree with that.
Because
I
I do
think
think that's a benefit of religion when it's done well, and it doesn't seem to be working well. And I don't know if it's because it's not believable or what. It's not updating fast enough. If it's, I don't know. Like I can't help not believe it, right? And I can Jordan Peterson my way into seeing the good in it, but I still can't participate it in the same way that I did 5 years ago. There's just I can't make myself do that and still I I don't know how to. And maybe there's a way and I just haven't learned how, but I just yeah, I can't do that. But I was wondering like on this similar topic, like what do you think the imbalance like in the secular world, ex-Mormon world, there's obviously this political imbalance. So what do you attribute that to?
I think a lot of people informed their political beliefs based on their religious teachings. So, for example, with regard to abortion,
Hmm.
there were some people that maybe were social. I leaned social libertarian before. I was a social libertarian and an 11th article of faith kind of person.
Hmm.
So while I wouldn't have, elected abortion, I felt like it was more of a religious theological construct of when does the pregnancy become a person.
Hmm.
And so I didn't feel like government should get involved in that before. But I've seen people who believed that at the moment of fertilization, it became a person because that was their theological construct. And then when they went through a faith transition, um, they revisited how they made that decision or how they evaluated abortion.
Hmm.
And they were more likely to look at the degree to which socioeconomic factors play into the frequency of abortion with unwanted, unplanned pregnancies. And that changed their political views with regard to the topic of abortion because their faith shift. So, abortion, gambling, same sex marriage, people living together without getting married. When people had a moral framework that was narrated to them through a religious construct, and the religious construct crumbles, then they find themselves renegotiating what are the components of their moral framework. And to the
Hmm.
extent that some of them were informed almost entirely by religious theology, that will shift.
What do you think informs an atheist conservative? Like, how do they even exist then? Like, I think the statistic, like for secular atheist types, I want to say it's like 30 to 70%. So there are a minority, but there's still a good chunk of people that are more conservative and they don't believe in a God or anything like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you my personal biases, and I don't self-identify as an atheist. I self-identify as a pantheist, which Richard Dawkins says is sexed up atheism anyway.
I only use that term because it was easy. I actually don't usually throw that term out, but I'm
Yeah.
using it in the broader sense of there are a bunch of people that do identify as atheist
Yeah.
and more
Yeah.
conservative leaning.
Yeah. So myself, I believe that where free markets function, that's where more creativity and growth and things happen. And so where a market can function as a free market, I believe that it's better to let the markets function.
Mm-hmm.
And then I believe there's some markets that really don't function well as free markets, because for a free market to be a free market, there needs to be access to information. People are making decisions not under duress. They have choices. There's competition, things like that, for a free market decision to be made. And I don't think healthcare is a free market. Like, if I have a heart attack and I'm going to the hospital, I'm not price shopping. I'm not, my
Mm-hmm.
decisions are made under duress. Whatever it takes to keep me alive, that's what's going to be paid.
Mm-hmm.
And so that creates disincentives in the program in healthcare that exist. There, LASIK eye surgery can be competitive and work as a free market, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
the decisions, there's competition, there's price disclosure, the decisions aren't made under duress. Most dentistry also can be competitive, but the
Mm-hmm.
majority of what we spend in healthcare is not a free market. So where I believe there aren't where free markets can't function, then I'm a fiscal centrist. So I'd be an advocate for Medicare for all with private insurance supplements
Mm-hmm.
and private providers like in Switzerland. I'd be an advocate for that. And then I'm a social libertarian, government stay out of your personal life.
Mm-hmm.
So I align economically where I believe free markets function. Oh, and the other thing is I mentioned earlier is that I think a lot of our problems that we have to do with bureaucracies, because bureaucracies stifle creativity, innovation, and so forth. And I dislike bureaucracies that are government bureaucracies as much as I dislike large corporate bureaucracies, in collusion as well. So I think the
Mm-hmm.
problem is bureaucracy, whether it's government or business. So I would align with the conservatives economically, where I believe there are free markets.
That's interesting. So that's so fascinating to me because I would say probably, oh, let's say 50 years ago. Wouldn't the whole spectrum of the United States be for free markets? But you're saying that that's making you conservative, right? This is just, I'm just trying to, it's fascinating to me that that's the thing that makes you conservative because to me, that's like an American thing. Do you see what
Um,
I'm saying?
yeah, I think there in as individuals we see dysfunctions and corruption and marginalization,
Mm-hmm.
and we see it in the bureaucracies of government, and we also see it in big business, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so the question is what are you going to do about it? There are people that strongly believe that public education is important to provide opportunity for people to raise their socioeconomic class, and for
Right.
us, and we benefit from having an educated workforce and so forth. And there are some people who are far conservative who don't believe in public education. They believe everything should be private education, give people vouchers, they can choose where to go. And there are people on the left that think that we don't do enough in public education. Instead of K through 12, we should start when they're 3 years old, and we should go all the way through 2 or 4 years of college
Mm-hmm.
on the left. And then there are people kind of in between. So I would say when there are dysfunctions in public education, you need to have private education to provide an offset and introduce competition.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want government dollars going to religious schools, because I think there should be separation of church and state. And so I would advocate for charter schools,
Mm-hmm.
realizing that there are problems when you take funding from public schools and put them in charter schools, but there's so much dysfunction in the public schools that there needs to be competition introduced to fix some of those problems,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that pisses off everyone, because on the
Yeah.
right, uh, I support public schools, and on the left, I support charter schools too. And so I can't ever run for office because I'd piss everybody off, is how I
Yeah,
view things.
I know,
So
right?
to me, conservative means limited government control or influence of markets and businesses and things like that. To me, that's what conservative, economically, that's what conservative is.
Hmm.
And there are some people that talk about being a classic libertarian or a
Classical liberal.
classical liberal, which is different than what a lot of people attribute to conservative today. A lot of people that contribute to conservative today have influence, I think, from like the religious right, so that they're invoking those kinds of values. And with the dynamic of Trump, they're evoking nationalism into what conservatism means. And it didn't mean that before. In the past, conservatism meant free markets, not tariffs and trade wars.
Mm-hmm.
Conservatism in the past would have meant that we had an immigration system that wasn't broken so that we could get guest workers in where we have labor force participation problems.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been a conservative approach. But what's happened in the US and other countries is nationalism and the religious right have co-opted, I think, political conservatism, at least the meaning that I'm attributing to it. So I think a lot of non-theists, would say, who are conservative, would say it's preferable to deal with a system where don't have all the bureaucracy of government controlling and micromanaging everything.
Hmm.
But then I would push back and say, when Fortune 500 companies collude to do things, that creates just as much bureaucracy and dysfunction as when government's doing it,
Mm-hmm.
is what I would say.
Yeah, I think if I were to say why the things that make when I say, yeah, I'm more conservative leaning, it's small government. So it's like you can't collude with the government if it's too small to collude with, right? Like it always puzzles me why we want more government. And it's just like you think that's going to solve the problems because I think bigger government means that there's more. I don't know. I understand it's balance, right? But example, I have um, this is an example my brother gave me. He was like, so Mattel makes toys. And, if someone comes in and says, hey, we need to have regulation on toys to make sure toys are safe and that we don't, make sure we don't have lead in toys and just, we don't want people selling toys that are going to be dangerous for kids. And you would think a toy company would be against that kind of um, thing. And actually, the big toy companies were the ones advocating for it because the thing that the toy has to go through to be checked off as safe costs money, and that's an investment that they can make, but a mom and pop toy maker can't. And so that's the kind of stuff that the conservatives seeing. They're saying, "Oh, you want to be safe, but what you're not realizing is the unintended consequence of these big businesses being in bed with the regulators and making it easier for them to have a monopoly." So that and I understand that there's the other side of that of the monopoly, right? Like the fact that if it was just a completely like unregulated free market, that you would have banks, for example, failing and then the government's needing to bail out, right?
Yeah.
I understand that you can't just have no regulation at all, but it's just interesting that they're seeing two different problems. Um, one saying, hey, government needs to enforce these regulations to make things better and safer. And the other side saying, well, that's just making a problem worse. Like you're creating a new problem with that regulation that you just created. So you're making
Uh,
it harder.
yeah. As a financial advisor, I see that all the time because I see insurance agents out there selling products, misrepresenting what those products will do
Hmm.
so they can earn a huge commission that tie people up into some sort of annuity product
Yeah.
that they don't have sufficient liquidity for what the client needs, and it never performs the way it was represented to the client. And that kind of product shouldn't even be legal, you know, where an 80-year-old buys something with a 15-year surrender charge and almost no liquidity, you know, and put half of their money into it. Like,
Mm, wow. That is terrible.
right, that shouldn't exist. So I want regulation that makes it so those products don't exist. Like Utah passed laws that said that kind of product couldn't have a surrender charge of more than 10 years, for example. But in Montana, products with surrender charges of like 16 years still exist.
Mm,
And the other thing, like with the bank thing, to the extent that there are financial advisors out there misrepresenting and churning and not following ethical standards, they're creating a decrease in confidence in the professionalism of everybody else. If a couple regional banks fail and everybody loses confidence in their bank, even though their bank probably didn't do the things of the banks, other banks that fail, that it's a problem for the system. Because if everybody runs on the bank and they redeem their deposits, then our whole financial system crashes because all that money was loaned out. You know, it's not sitting in a vault. So I hate regulation, but my business couldn't exist without it at the same time.
yeah, that's yeah. But I think this just beautifully illustrates why you need people that are seeing the shortfalls of both sides of thinking and how you need them working together. And um,
You
I
don't win
don't,
elections by, those people don't win elections.
yeah, that's true. But at the same time, like, I don't feel like that politics has really infiltrated like legislatures, state legislatures is quite as bad. Like I'm watching them pass stuff in Utah and it seems like, you've got people in there, like the Salt Lake, for example. Um, you've got advocates in there that are trying to make sure there's a voice for the the ag users. And then you've got people in there that are obviously trying to say, okay, we've got this problem here. How can we mitigate that as well with the Great Salt Lake? And they're talking together. And maybe they're just talking nice together because we had so much water this winter. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but I I went to a presentation on that and they were just kind of talking about how you kind of have to work this stuff out before there's the drought, not during the drought.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah. I
I
don't know.
feel like politics does work at some levels. It's almost like I don't know, or at our presidential level and stuff like that. It's like entertainment at this point. Like I don't think people can even point to like things that Trump passed. They know about all of the drama and stuff. They know more about Stormy Daniels than they know about any of the policies he actually passed.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with Biden. They know how many times he must spoke, or they can quote word for word one of the weird things that he said about ice cream. I don't know
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
Then they can actually say like what kind of policies he's been advocating for or passing or anything that Congress has been doing. Like it's just entertainment. Like that's the problem. Nobody's paying attention to the stuff they should really be paying attention to. Including me, by the way. Like I'm part of the problem. So
It's
I don't know.
it's the algorithm, right?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm wondering if there's conversations that could make the church better and that could help people as they have a change of belief and not feel like they have to be against the church, right? Like maybe there's a middle way that is more long term, you know, and we're not talking about it because we're just being fed the short term thing, the not very long lasting thing. I don't know.
Yeah. So when you go back to your question about content creation, you've I think you've accurately identified that there's a hole to be filled with regard to what we're talking about.
And what I don't know, I don't know that it'll be watched. You know what I mean? Like the eyeballs go toward the algorithm for a reason. It's not like the algorithm was created to take your attention. The algorithm is paying attention to what you're paying attention to and it's giving it to you. Like the algorithm is based off of us and what we are choosing to watch. So it's really just as much as the viewer's fault as it is the algorithm's fault. Like why are we going for that stuff? Like why aren't we going for the more meaningful stuff? Like it's not, does that make sense too? Like
Yeah. Yeah. So you want to read Brian McLaren's Do I Stay Christian? Or is it Do I Stay Christian
does
or
he
Why
talk
I
about
Stay
that?
Christian? Yeah. I mean, he's politically progressive and he talks about how politics have taken over the Christian movement. And he certainly has some valid concerns.
Hmm.
Um, but in the second half of the book, he talks about why he would stay Christian even as not a literalist believer.
Hmm.
I think you'd enjoy the book, and I think that the things that we're talking about, I think, are the big whole. It's our this is the society of our the fabric of our society is tearing. It's past a tipping point. We're losing conversations about shared values and shared identities. Um, it's very, very divisive. Um, the decline of religion is part of it. The polarization of politics is part of it. Um, but along the way, I think they're going to be. It's not going to be the largest audience, but along the way, they're going to be people that are going to want content that from bridge builders.
Well, there's a few people that listen.
Yeah. Me.
Yeah, I guess it's been for me, right? Have you found that it's been for you to like create stuff and do your talks that you give? Like it's for you, right? It's giving you meaning too. It's not just like it's good that it helps people too, but I don't know.
Yeah. One story is in July, I was down at Sunstone and there was a man that told me he had gone through a faith crisis recently and he was in the raging stage. And before his faith crisis, he was like, he and his dad did everything together, like lived close together, did everything together. His dad was his best friend. And when he went through his faith crisis, like their relationship just totally tore apart. And his dad was constantly trying to like, badger him to come back kind of thing. And this guy said, he told me, he said, Dad, there's this guy who gave a TED talk about what his faith crisis was like. And I don't have the words to explain what this guy did, but he explained my experience. Would would you watch his TED talk? And his dad said yes. And so he messaged the link to my TED talk. And 30 minutes later, his dad called him and said, I'm so sorry. I had no idea.
Mm,
And within a week, their relationship was recovered,
mm,
like my book club with my Mormon friends, but more meaningful because it was his dad.
that's cool.
And so when he told me that, yeah, like part of that is for me because I feel grateful for the opportunity to participate, that I got to do something, that my life had meaning.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's just because I attribute meaning to life as to participate in the lives of others. Um, it's a difficult question. Some of the content that I create is just for me working through things,
Yeah.
but some of it is exposing a degree of vulnerability that perhaps provides words or connection to somebody else that they maybe are seeking but not finding.
Sure. No, I'm gonna give you an example of why that doesn't motivate me. I'm happy when people if someone listened to something I said and they were able to take it and use it and it made their life better. It's not that I like, obviously I'm very worried about creating meaningless content, right? Like
Yeah.
I think I don't want to waste people's time. I don't want to waste anybody that's listening to this. I don't want to waste their attention because I feel like my attention gets stolen from me so much that I'm just like, I don't want to do that to other people. So that's why that matters so much to me. Um, so it's not that, but I know that there are people that give their life to religious organizations because it saved their life. You know what I mean? Like, so like that story you just told of it helping that relationship. I know that there's stories where there's something that I believe is illegitimate and they give that. And maybe I shouldn't be upset about that. You know, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe they needed that. But I don't think there's almost like an anti thing. If I got too many people saying, "Oh, thank you so much," I would start to get skeptical about whether I'm doing the right thing. Because you can, it's like a drug. Like I use this example with Bill Rill on his podcast. Like if you give a drug addict more drugs, they're going to say thank you. You know, they're going to think that they need that at that moment. But I don't want to be giving people something. And I'm not the judge of what it is. So at the same time, maybe I just don't know. But I know, I guess I'm just floundering in the space. I'm just doing what I'm doing, what I have
I,
time for.
I don't know. I think you're being thoughtful. Um, those are all really big questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I say I'm doing it for me, I think the cool thing is being able to meet people like you and like Tony um and all the people over at Porch Time, like and just connect. Like I feel bad that the people listening can't do that at that level too, because it's kind of like you do kind of have these personal conversations and you're just like, wow, I really like this, and this about Anthony Miller. Like, I hope I can be a little bit more like that, you know? Like, and you can do that from just watching, but maybe they have a question they can't ask you, you know, and
Yeah.
they don't have that connection to you. So, there's that part of that is probably for me.
Yeah.
So, I don't
Maybe
know.
more, maybe as people watch more of those kinds of discussions, um, it informs how they engage with people they know personally.
That's possible. And that would be a benefit, right? I would
Yeah.
consider that awesome.
Yeah.
Um, just one last parting note. We can
Yeah.
close up here.
All right.
I had this thought a few times and I never said it, but you were saying like I talk to people and I ask them things and I keep going down that road. And one thing I've been surprised about is how willing people are to talk. Like, I think sometimes we shut down the conversation before we even start it, assuming that it's going to go a certain way. We don't give people the chance. Um, but I've been surprised, and I don't. Again, it kind of depends on how you're going into it. I think when you're really willing to just go right in, you're probably not in the right mindset. But if you're hesitant to even go into the conversation, my guess is that you'll probably behave better. So just try it. I think you'd be surprised at how well the interlocutor takes it, if that makes sense. People are patient. I think they give you the benefit of the doubt and they can sense that you're hesitant to say something, you know.
Yeah.
Does that make
And I,
sense what I'm saying there?
it does. And I actually think to the extent that the conversations are either in person or on video like this, um, that's more helpful than when it's text on a social media website.
Yeah, for sure.
But
Yeah.
I engage in some groups that stretch me because they are mostly people with whom I disagree. But it's helpful for me as practice because it makes me better in person, is what
Yeah.
my belief is. So I think there's value in the leaning into very difficult conversations across significantly differentiated beliefs as practice to do better when we're in person.
So yeah, I agree with that. As long as you're practicing how you would actually behave in person and not practicing how you'd yell,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. How to have impossible conversations. I probably read it twice and listened to it 3 times because I
Mm,
wanted to understand street epistemology and how to engage in very, very difficult conversations. I imagine when he in the book writes about talking with like a Ku Klux Klan, white supremacist or
hmm
something like that. I imagine how emotionally charged that might be to deal with someone that's
mm,
is so dogmatic, but that you approach the conversation with curiosity and with tools to engage the person in a productive conversation rather than just a shouting match.
yeah.
Um, I think there's value in that. At least
Yep.
I find it.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we don't have a chance to practice very much either. Right? Like it's hard to do it online and text, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And you're told not to talk about those kinds of things at work, so you can't practice there.
Yes.
And even with family relationships, like, oh man, if you could count how many relationships were strained because of like COVID, for example, I'm sure it was
Yeah.
tons. Like
Yeah.
we don't have the practice to have these kinds of conversations where we fundamentally disagree,
Yeah.
it seems.
And doing it over the Thanksgiving table often doesn't work out very well.
Once a year is not enough. Like that kind
No.
of goes back to the 5-to-1 ratio that David Osler pulled into his book. And I know he got it from somewhere else and I can't remember where, but I think that's a really true, a very true thing, is that 5-to-1 ratio of having positive to heavy. Like I can't remember what a conversation that strains you, that's hard. If you have one of those to every five, like
That don't.
positive and
Yeah.
light conversations,
Yeah.
then your relationship can handle that.
Yeah.
But if it's heavy every single time you're talking to somebody, it's probably not gonna and get excited about seeing them again because it's like, oh, I know what that's gonna turn into.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyways,
We need to produce more content about that, I think.
yeah. I don't know how much of my stuff you've watched. I did a whole presentation for the Good Book Club on relationships across difference divides.
I saw that you did it, but I didn't watch the whole episode.
So that's a slideshow presentation. I don't know. I maybe we could take pieces of that and create something. We could make it new again so that people can see it. It has
I'll
good stuff in there.
Yeah, I'll watch it.
Well, it's been good talking to you.
Thanks,
Thanks
Marty.
for the conversation. Thanks for being awesome. I don't know if you remember talking to me on the phone
I
long
do.
ago,
I was in my
but
kitchen.
I was really happy that you took the time to do that then too.
I appreciated that. Yeah,
So
thanks.